And here we go now from Asbury Park, New Jersey. I am super excited for this one. You can see Funhouse up on that wall, and that plays a whole theme here along with some of these other murals. So I originally filmed this for another Sopranos filming location trip, but there's so much history that ties into the episode and the individual shots that we now have a ton of stuff to get into on this one. So it'll be like a filming locations and area history combo video. We're now walking along 5th Avenue towards Ocean Avenue, just across the street from the world-famous Asbury Park Boardwalk. This is Lance and Debbie's Wonder Bar, and we're starting here because this wall is a great throwback to the old Palace Amusements building, a famous local landmark that was torn down years ago, and we'll be exploring that place in great detail on the back end. And the Sopranos episode we're mostly going to focus on today is the Season 2 finale, which was called Funhouse, a quick tie-in to the Wonder Bar, but directly in front of us as we head towards the boardwalk is the Robinson Ale House, which is a bonus location. In Season 3, there is a flashback scene in which Tony and Jackie are eating lunch inside this building on the boardwalk side, waiting for Big Pussy to arrive. And as we look back at the Wonder Bar, we get a good shot of the tribute to Tillie, that smiling face atop the building. Tillie started at the Palace Amusements and has since become the unofficial mascot of the town. More history we'll get into on the back end. And I also want you to keep this shot down 5th Avenue in mind for later on, as that is a minor location we'll discuss in a few minutes. And now, this place. What you're seeing now is actually 3 separate areas that make up one giant structure. The huge left side of the building is the Paramount Theatre. In the middle here is the entrance to an area called the Grand Arcade, and the huge right side going further out toward the beach is the Convention Hall. So, let's get into the Sopranos Funhouse episode. We're going to start by heading south, which is the direction Tony was heading as the dream sequence starts. You can see it has recently snowed on an empty boardwalk as he looks back toward the Grand Arcade. His vantage point would have been from right around this spot. The building looks pretty much exactly the same as it did in 2000 when the episode aired, but there have been some considerable changes as we make our way further south away from that building. One change of note is this place over here next to the Robinson Ale House. You can see a small advertisement for saltwater taffy in front of a store called It's Taffy. But in the scene as Tony walks by, it features a much older structure and facade that has since been heavily remodeled. And for those that don't know, saltwater taffy is a sweet, soft candy that was invented in Atlantic City in the 1800s. It's been heavily advertised, marketed, sold, and consumed in every shore town in the state ever since. And the Sopranos incorporated that visually here in Funhouse. So this bench is a noteworthy spot for 3 separate Sopranos moments. One in Funhouse, the other 2 are in the following season. In an episode titled, To Save Us All from Satan's Power, that aired in 2001, about a year after Funhouse, Tony, Pussy, and Jackie go for a walk, stopping here as Jackie sits down to smoke a cigarette during a flashback scene. And in the then-present time from that episode, Tony walks over to approximately the same spot as he's waiting for Paulie. He's thinking back to the mentioned flashback scenes as he looks over the beach and ocean. So that makes this a pretty significant bench in the Sopranos universe. But going back to the Funhouse dream now, Tony and his crew meet up at this bench, which at the time faced the ocean. The railing, light poles, and it appears all of the benches have been replaced in the ensuing years, so they all look a bit different now. The buildings behind the guys have all been heavily remodeled and feature a much more modern look today. We get a look back towards the Grand Arcade of Philly and Gigi, and then one of Hesh with the Convention Hall still looking exactly the same. So while this isn't the exact bench from the show, this current bench on the Asbury Park Boardwalk comes about as close to sacred Sopranos ground as you can get. And let's document this memorial. In honor of Vanessa Lee Hoffman Vetrini, who loved the Jersey Shore, its beaches, boardwalks, and the wonderful memories made there, we will love you forever, the Hoffman family. So shout out to Vanessa Lee Hoffman Vetrini. So, going back to the Sopranos episode, we're going to bring in some more Asbury Park history here. When the guys are sitting on the bench, we can see some of the buildings behind them. Today, the bigger building has the restaurants and the Taffy place. The last section at the end of the building is another restaurant called the Iron Whale, the one with all of those umbrellas. In the scene, you can also see a tiny white building behind Silvio and Chris next to what will become the Iron Whale that looks to be closed up. Today, that building is the home of the world-famous Madame Marie's. Madame Marie's is a local psychic reading shop that has a history dating all the way back to 1932, when fortune teller Marie Castello set up a business on the Asbury Park Boardwalk. Her original booth was much further south of here, and Marie would later recall that her earliest customers wore dresses, evening gowns, and tuxedos to walk the boardwalk, as Asbury Park visitors were much more formal in the 1930s and 40s than they would become in later decades. Marie closed the original location in 1997 when the area was experiencing a severe tourist decline and moved the business to nearby Ocean Township, but she returned to the boardwalk 7 years later, opening the Temple of Knowledge here at this location in 2004. Marie unfortunately passed away in 2008 at 93 years old, but as you can see, the Temple of Knowledge remains open to this day, still being run by her granddaughter. Alright, so our next shots bring us a few blocks south on the boardwalk near 2nd Avenue, at an establishment called Tony's, which is quite an odd coincidence. It looks like Tony's sells hot dogs, fries, cheesesteaks, and Italian sausage. Going back to another Funhouse sequence, the character Tony is walking in place right around here in front of a mural for Madame Marie's. And of course, Silvio is once again imitating Michael Corleone from The Godfather Part 3, wardrobe included, to help Tony realize a friend is betraying him. Tony again finds the imitation hilarious. Now see that building to the left? We caught the corner of it in the close-up shot of Silvio. That building operates as the Empress Hotel, a local landmark that opened as a luxury resort in 1961, closed in 1988, and then reopened in 2004 and has been operating ever since. And just over Tony's shoulder we see the convention hall, almost half a mile away from here, again looking the same as it did in 2000. So just after the Silvio scene, Tony walks over to the beach side of the boardwalk and puts some change into a tower viewer, and behind him you can see quite a bit of change since the scene was filmed. The signage on top of the Empress on Ocean Avenue is visible to the far right, but just to the left of that is a building that once housed numerous businesses, one of which was the original location of Madame Marie's Temple of Knowledge. Also located there was Criterion, a famous local chocolate and candy shop that left this location in 1993, but still operates in Eatontown, about 20 minutes away from here. But take note of that open-air structure that appears to straddle the boardwalk in the distance. That would be the remnants of the old Asbury Park Casino, which had quite a bit more to it when it was built in 1929. The casino, as it was called, was never a gambling hall, like we think of when we hear that word casino, but more of an entertainment complex that had rides and amusements, a carousel, and a section that was built on a pier on the beach that housed an indoor skating rink and eventually a concert arena. In the latter part of the 1900s, Asbury Park suffered a serious decline in tourism. That's why you keep hearing these company closing dates in the 80s and 90s, and as a result, some of the buildings, even historic ones, suffered from neglect and fell into disrepair as those businesses shut down. The old skating rink section of the casino suffered serious roof damage and was eventually demolished. In the Sopranos scene, that section is still standing and you can see the roof caving in, while the boardwalk entrance is still enclosed. Eventually, Tony looks up from the tower viewer and sees the beach and the ocean. So the next area we're going to come to is probably the most famous landmark in all of Asbury Park. Just off the boardwalk, at the corner of Ocean Avenue and 2nd Avenue, a music venue and nightclub called the Stone Pony. When it opened in 1974, the Stone Pony immediately became the Jersey Shore hotspot for local rock artists. The most famous of these are the obvious Jersey legends Bruce Springsteen, who hit superstardom in the 70s, and then John Bon Jovi in the 80s. Like many of the local businesses, the Pony had its first of multiple closures in 1991, but has remained open since being purchased by real estate company Madison Marquette in 2000. The indoor area has a stage, dance floor, and bar area that can accommodate 850 patrons. After the area and club were revitalized in the early 2000s, the Stone Pony expanded its property all the way over here to 1st Avenue and built the Summer Stage, an outdoor concert venue that operates every year from May to October and can handle over 4,000 guests for the more popular music acts. Unfortunately, from this vantage point we can't see the actual stage, but just above the wall you can see some of the stage rigging. And now, back to the Sopranos Funhouse episode. Remember way back at the beginning when we were at the Wonder Bar, I said to keep the shot down 5th Avenue in mind. The beginning of this mini car scene with Adriana, Chris, and Furio was shot in front of Bradley Park. That's that open grassy area we see through the back window of the car. Bradley Park sits across 5th Avenue from the Wonder Bar and across Ocean Avenue from the boardwalk entrance that we took earlier by the Paramount Theatre. And in keeping with the surreal nature of a fever dream, we get a Dutch angle shot from the corner of Ocean and 2nd Avenues. The Phillips Seaview Apartments, that tall building in the distance, is still here today, looking exactly the same as it did when the scene was filmed. And since this is about 10 years before the Stone Pony expanded, we catch a glimpse of a small plaza that existed on the corner back then. That was obviously torn down in the ensuing years to make way for the summer stage area. The crew then drive off heading south down Ocean Avenue. The next section we're going to check out is going to take us back to where we started and has a bit of old pop culture history to it. We're now back further north on the boardwalk heading into the Grand Arcade here, the indoor area spanning the boardwalk that connects the Paramount Theatre and the Convention Hall. We can see the Paramount Theatre makes up the left side of this building and the Convention Hall would be over there to the right with the red and blue marquee hanging just above the entrance. This area acts as not only a concourse area for both the Paramount and Convention Hall, but it's also a mini mall of sorts with a few permanent retail shops. On occasion, this room hosts the Asbury Park Bazaar, which is a very popular marketplace and event, usually on weekends and special occasions. The organizers describe it as a celebration of makers, music, and art featuring local and regional handcrafted and vintage goods, so definitely check the schedule for that if you're ever in the area. This is one of the entrances that is now blocked by this really neat piece of artwork, owing to the actual theater part of the building currently being closed. And here we have a retail store utilizing the popular Funhouse theme. This entire structure was opened in 1930 with the Paramount's grand opening, showing the 1927 classic Wings, which won Best Picture at the first ever Academy Awards ceremony. In attendance during the Paramount's opening were actors Buddy Rogers, Ginger Rogers, the Marx Brothers, Carole Lombard, Frederick March, and some more of the biggest stars of the day. In the ensuing years, it's been a venue for concerts, film screenings, film festivals, celebrations, and countless other special events. The theater has a seating capacity of 1,600, so it's a pretty big one. And once again, going back to the Sopranos Fever Dream sequence, right around here is where we get Tony's view when he was out on the boardwalk looking into the tower viewer. He's surprised to see himself and Paulie sitting at a table across the Grand Arcade playing cards, which almost has a prison feel to it. You can see to the left the Convention Hall's red and blue marquee was in place during filming, and the square and diamond floor patterns are still in place to this day. And we'll get a close-up of that area in a moment. And let's get a quick look inside the Convention Hall. Note the AP Spring Bazaar up on the marquee there. This closed section is the lobby of the Convention Hall. Seating capacity is listed at 3,200. In 1969, Led Zeppelin actually turned down an offer to headline the final night of the original Woodstock Festival, and instead opted to play a show in the main room over here. There's also a semi-famous video of the original Lynyrd Skynyrd playing a show here in 1977, a few months before the plane crash that killed original lead singer Ronnie Van Zant and guitarist Steve Gaines. Other famous artists to grace the hall with performances include the Rolling Stones, Frank Sinatra, The Doors, Black Sabbath, local legend Bruce Springsteen, and countless others. Both the Paramount and the Convention Hall were added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1979. And unfortunately, both have been closed to events since 2019, waiting on much-needed renovations. Alright, so remember the close-up shots of Tony and Paulie after we see them from across the Grand Arcade, and eventually Tony shoots Paulie? That was over by these doors, but a bit further over to the left and facing south, and you can see after being shot, Paulie would have fallen into the giant crack in the floor that is still here over 25 years later. And before we go back out to the boardwalk, if we make a quick detour to our left and head out of these open side doors, just outside of the convention hall and along this walkway area, we end up at the start of this pier, where the most noteworthy section of the Fever Dream took place. We get a nice shot of the ocean, the beach, and a view looking south of the boardwalk. To the right is the Robinson Ale House, and even further to the right is Tillie on top of the Wonder Bar where we started this whole adventure. And about a half-mile south, maybe you can see the remnants of the old Asbury Park Casino way down there. Okay, so do you remember the $4 a pound bit? Right over here along one of these brick pillars is where Tony would have been casually strolling along the fish market, and you can see the jetty behind him is still out there. Today, this area is not a fish market at all, and I'm not sure if it ever was or not. But currently, this is a bar and restaurant area simply known as the Beach Bar, an establishment that receives huge crowds in the summer months owing to its convenient location right here alongside the beach, which itself also has quite a turnout in season. During peak times, there is almost nowhere in here or out there to plant yourself because of the huge crowds. Tony looks down at a fish that is talking to him in Big Pussy's voice in an obvious metaphor that Big Pussy is treacherous and needs to sleep with the fishes, another one of the many references the show borrows from The Godfather. The two of them converse for a few moments before Tony blows a gasket and throws the entire table over. That was right over against that wall. You can see quite a bit of change in the 25 years or so since, obviously today it has the furnishings of an outdoor bar, but also the more festive canvas on the door and window areas, owing to it being not only a beach area, but also a beach bar area. And of course, any fish market remnant is nowhere to be found. Alright friends, that is going to conclude our time on the boardwalk here, but we do have one last piece of Asbury Park history to check out that I promised we'd see on the back end. Our last stop takes us to the corner of Kingsley Street and Asbury Avenue. And for a bit more context and so you can get your bearings on where we're at exactly, we're going to check out this map of the area that the city has conveniently installed on the corner over here. And if you recall back to some of our earlier landmarks, we can see we're just down the road from the Empress Hotel. And here's a better shot of the famous signage on top of the building. And just to the right of that from our view is the old Asbury Park Casino straddling the boardwalk. Okay, so on this map you can see Kingsley Street goes south parallel to Ocean Avenue, and it ends at the intersection with Asbury Avenue, which is the corner we are on now. Once through the intersection, the road heads southwest to become Cookman Avenue, but years ago it was a bit different. Kingsley Street actually continued through the intersection to the southeast, which would have been to the right on this map, and headed straight for that blue parking lot circle at the bottom. So that created an additional part of the intersection with Cookman Avenue, right at about that red circle at the bottom. And it was at that intersection where the old Palace Amusements building once stood for over 100 years before it was demolished. Today, that final stretch of Kingsley Street is now a parking lot, and hopefully you can see those two tiny little connecting roads, Wesley Lake Drive and St. James Place. They were created once the palace was taken down. Eventually, townhomes and condos were built all along the area. So getting off the map and back into the real world, straight across where that gentleman is walking his dog. He would have been walking along the front side of the Palace Amusements building along the start of Cookman Avenue. And from this vantage point, we would be looking at the northeast corner of the building, and, as I mentioned a moment ago, Kingsley Street would have continued through the intersection to the left into the modern-day parking lot. Palace Amusements would have extended somewhat out into this direction, and it would have created an entertainment area as you got closer to the boardwalk. First encompassing the Carousel building, which is that round structure straight ahead, and then eventually you get to the Asbury Park Casino, which housed the old concert venue and skating rink. Eventually, this complex would come to shape the area's history in a major way, but its origin story takes us all the way back to the 19th century. The Palace Amusements building was first built in 1888 by an entrepreneur named Ernest Schnitzler as a way to capitalize on the vast number of summer tourists that flocked to an area that lacked more organized entertainment. Later in the year, the Carousel was built. Eventually, the palace was expanded and an observation wheel was built first in 1895, and the original casino building opened in 1904. A fire destroyed that, so the long-standing replacement was built in 1929, around the same time that the Paramount and Convention Hall were opened. All of these buildings together, along with the boardwalk, became famous Asbury Park landmarks for the next 50 years. The Palace building saw further expansions in the 1950s with the Haunted Castle and the Funhouse, which increased attendance considerably. The Olympic Bobs and the Orient Express followed in the 60s, and eventually, the Twister and the Auto Scooters in the 70s, all making up several diverse entertainment options contained to the same business, which was one of the earlier examples of an amusement park in the United States. Most of these different sections were advertised in murals and paintings on the front of the building, along with two identical faces on the left and right front wall, and those faces were called Tillie. Steeplechase Park in Coney Island, New York is generally credited with being the original modern-day amusement park. Opening in 1907, it was largely designed by a 19th century showman named George Tillie, and was famous for its mascot, called the Steeplechase Face, also known as Funny Face, because it had an exaggerated, almost surreal type of smile. In 1955, the owners of the Palace Amusements building decided to paint a pair of similar fun faces on the front of their building, and these faces were then named Tillie in a nod to Steeplechase founder George Tillie. Over the years, the faces became the mascot of not only the Palace Amusements building, but also the area during the rest of the 20th century, and certainly for Asbury Park continuing into the present day, which is evident in the numerous tributes to Tillie that still continue on. And like we mentioned multiple times throughout, Asbury Park eventually fell on hard times. Many of the businesses closed and the buildings fell into disrepair or were abandoned. The Palace Amusements closed in 1988, but the empty building stood for more than a decade before it was demolished in 2004. The Carousel building still stands, but without the actual carousel in it. And of course, very little remains of the old casino building. When the Palace was taken down, the right side Tillie was demolished along with it. The left side Tillie was saved and preserved and is currently in a stored location, but has come out to the boardwalk for a few limited special occasions over the years. And going back to the Sopranos Funhouse episode 1 last time, there were two quick shots that were filmed right here in this area. One is during the Fever Dream. We see Tony walking up alongside the Palace Amusements building, with the still existing left side Tillie featured prominently in the shot at the corner of Kingsley and Cookman. And then, at the very end of the episode during the Rolling Stones Through and Through montage, there is a shot of a man walking into the old Park Cinema, which sat directly next to the Palace building. You even catch a glimpse of the right side Tillie's ear in the shot. That was another building that goes back many years, first opening in the 1910s as the Lyric Theatre, and operated as such until 1965, when it became the Park Theatre with 3 screens. It eventually would show adult content as the Park Cinema, which is evident in the Sopranos shot. Eventually, the park and the palace were demolished, and the entire area was redeveloped with condos making up the nearest buildings to the area. All of this went down right here at this intersection. Alright friends, that's all we got for today. I hope you enjoyed this stretch of Asbury Park as much as I did. Come on down and check out the local businesses, and of course, check out those historical places as well. And if you would be so kind as to helping the channel by hitting the like and subscribe buttons, we sure would appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see yous on the next one.